So again, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rahman Culver. I am a staffer at Montgomery Blair High School in Silver Spring, Maryland. I am actually the Diversity and Inclusion Coordinator here at Blair, which is obviously a more niche kind of role in the county right now, although a lot of schools are exploring establishing such a position to engage in DEI work. So the presentation that we're about to go through is indeed content that we shared with our staff in 2021, and we're happy to be able to kind of share it with a broader audience this afternoon. So if anyone would like to access these slides, the link is in the chat at this point, so you're welcome to kind of open that up and follow along at your will. And you're welcome to continue to access these after the presentation, just as a matter of personal reference. If all goes as planned, I will be joined by one other presenter for the second half of the session here. So I'll be joined by Ms. Rebecca Hughes. And as far as our objective and desired outcomes for the afternoon, we're going to be speaking basically on the response to concerns that have been shared more broadly across the county and the country, particularly in the wake of the racial justice uprisings that we saw in 2020. There was a upswell of kind of student testimony, particularly through kind of anonymous Instagram accounts such as Black at various schools in Montgomery County, for instance. And we saw that there was continued kind of shares from students about being in classrooms and experiencing folks using language that a lot of students found very harmful. In particular, when it comes to racial epithets and other marginalizing language, we found that there was a desire to kind of understand, well, what are some of the best practices of how to engage students around this language in the classroom, particularly when we're dealing with primary sources, with text that do use this language. So how do we as teachers do our due diligence and fulfill our professional responsibilities while at the same time adequately providing a safe environment for the students in our classrooms? So that's really what we're looking at here for the afternoon. So by the time we're done, we will have talked about some common mistakes, and then we will spend the bulk of our time reviewing some specific best practices. So you'll have a chance to see examples of exercises and assignments that do address some of these concerns. And so you can see what it looks like real time. So you can have some additional ideas, some content to kind of draw from and adapt before we're done this afternoon. So I will try to monitor the chat window as we go. So as questions come up, do feel free to kind of pose them. Obviously, we are a very, very intimate group. So if you would like to just kind of chime in as we're talking this afternoon, all of that is fun and appropriate. As far as our timing is concerned, again, we're just going to go over a couple of quick points to think about for our overview. The first thing we'll talk about is student-to-student misuse in the classroom, because that's also a question a lot of educators have, right? So I feel like I have a good handle on what I should do, but what happens when students are using such language with one another in the classroom? Where should I engage? How should I do that? So we'll talk about that as well. As I mentioned before, we will talk about some common mistakes. We'll go through some sample scenarios from other classrooms around the country and look at some of those pitfalls. And then again, we'll spend the bulk of our time going over some specific classroom resources. And we have been joined by Ms. Hughes at this point. So she is the Blair Social Studies RT resource teacher. And if you'd like to say hello, by all means, and say a few words, Ms. Hughes, I cede the floor to you.
Hi, everyone. Sorry I was a little late. I was kicking off another session briefly, but I'm super happy to be here with all of you and looking forward to the next, what is it now, 25 minutes or so.
Indeed. And as I've said, this will be more of a conversational experience, obviously, given that we have such an intimate crowd. So as I've already explained, we can all kind of chime in, just ask questions organically as they arise. So Ms. Hughes, as we're going through the things that you'd like to add, please just jump on in, and we'll keep things moving naturally that way. All right, so as far as just kind of getting into the content, we do kind of share this general advisory when we're talking about any kinds of conversations that may involve the very heart of what we're talking about today. If it may involve harm, if it may bring up some difficult feelings, we're actually mirroring and demonstrating what we suggest are best practices for the classroom. So when you're engaging with material or assignments that may, again, deal with some of the things we're going to be talking about today, we would suggest the same thing that you see here. So again, we are going to be addressing issues of racism, bias, obviously. For some of us, it may involve family background, family experiences. So again, we just want to be clear and transparent about that. And we want to make it clear that, again, if you feel things walking out of this session, that that is valid, that is okay. And we do encourage folks to engage with folks who are trusted adults, trusted colleagues, who can help kind of provide support where necessary. So again, want to mirror that and make that clear for what we should be doing in the classroom as well. So let's jump right in, all right? Because as I said, a lot of us may be showing up from different places this afternoon. And again, if we feel, again, that we as adults are in a good place, we feel like we have some good ideas on what to do, this might be one of the first things that comes to mind. What do I do when it comes to creating a safe environment for student-to-student interaction? All right, so what is my job as an educator to disrupt racial epithets, marginalizing language when it occurs among classmates, when they're saying these things to one another? So what you see here are some very clear and discrete talking points. And again, these are adapted from some resources from the Anti-Defamation League. They have wonderful resources on basically just anti-bias work in general, particularly when it comes to education. So we will recommend that as a wonderful resource moving forward that kind of builds on some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. So as you see here, really what we're going to be framing as we go through the afternoon here is it's not really about who is or isn't saying it, because as we know, particularly when it comes to racial epithets, it is complex as far as social kind of acceptable traditions or guidelines as far as how this language might be used in certain communities of color. As we know, if we teach students from African-American or Black communities, the use of the N-word is very much it is a kind of a powder keg when it comes to how society talks about it, how folks engage in that debate. So the classroom is no different. So if we have students who are in the classroom who may feel that this is something that I do amongst my peers, it's something I do amongst folks that I am close to in my own home, that's valid. We're not even going to address all of that, because the idea is not about who said it, but is that it was said. And the idea is that in the classroom, we have certain guidelines that we have to follow. And again, the idea is, regardless of the type of language that we might be talking about, it's basically just saying that using that word to put someone down is always unacceptable, all right? And again, it's okay to say, well, a lot of times we've again encountered, pushback when, well, it's just a joke, it's not serious. I use that with my friends all the time. It's just being very clear that, again, that's not an excuse, joke or not. That's what is often used as a way to kind of create a permissive environment for this type of talk. And again, it's very appropriate to say that you and I disagree about this. I acknowledge that you as a student use this way. We're not going to necessarily agree. But again, not all students in this room may agree with how you are kind of approaching the issue. So I have to make sure that I'm considering the needs of everyone in this room. So again, if we want to talk about it further, we can do this outside of class. But again, this is something that, again, is a hard, fast rule. And this is how we're going to kind of conduct class. So again, and as always, one of the nice ways to kind of encapsulate it in a very succinct way is, look, whether or not you feel like this is something that you use, the language is explicit. All right. If it wouldn't get played on the radio, then it won't play in the classroom. And that's a nice way to kind of diffuse situations sometimes and kind of pull it outside of this kind of value-based discussion. So again, here are some very clear kind of guidelines that we encourage folks to use when it comes to helping to kind of navigate those situations among students. Now, at this point, a lot of folks say, all right, well, this sounds fine, Mr. Culver. The idea is that, yes, we should create safe environments in the classroom. I think we all here are very competent educators. No one actually does, no one's really having a problem with this. So just as a way to kind of get a little bit of engagement this afternoon, before we get into the meat of the presentation, if you'll humor us, what you see in front of you are 3 different scenarios. So we just want to kind of look through this together. You tell us which one of these did not happen. Because again, it kind of gives us a sense of, what do we think is beyond the pale, all right? So I won't read these all verbatim, but as you look at those 3 scenarios, you can just put it in the chat one if you like. Which one of these do you feel is not true? Is it the one that involves, a teacher dressing up in a headband and a wig, using an accent inappropriately? Is it one that involves dancing around the classroom, talking about the fire goddess? Or is it one that talks about having a so-called classroom powwow and we're gonna have Native American attire? Which one of these did not happen? So again, feel free to just kind of drop it in the chat window. Abigail says all of them, and Vicky says, I can see all of them happening. So again, so you all are someone picked 2, so thank you, Derek. And you all are very keen on the nature of the exercise here, because all of these are essentially true. All right, but Derek did have a good instincts. The only thing that makes number 2 not true is I think the reference that the teacher made in this situation was the water goddess. It wasn't the fire goddess, it was the water goddess. And that situation actually went viral. It was very big in the news. That teacher ended up being suspended and I think ultimately fired for that situation. Obviously, these are all situations that inappropriately target students and general community members from Native American communities. For our area in particular, this is relevant because even our national football team has been the source of a lot of controversy around this sensibility. So here at Blair, for instance, we've even had conversations about, do we even display the former imagery that is associated with the Washington football team? And obviously the name has been changed now because of these sensibilities. So again, I'm very encouraged to know that I could not stump any of you. So you'll see here, same idea. You might feel like all of these are true. Again, the point is that these are all situations, and I'll save us the time because again, we all seem to be in the know here. These are all situations that have come up, like I said, and hit the national news in the last several years. These incidents, of course, targeting members from our LGBTQ+ communities. And then the last situation, again, when it deals to Black communities in particular, all of these situations, all of these scenarios are true. They've all involved educators. And again, the idea is, even when we're not thinking about necessarily that these are going to create a lot of harm, how do we make sure that we're being proactive and thoughtful about not creating harm for our students and creating experiences like this? Again, because in Montgomery County, in the wake of summer 2020, when we did see this kind of uptick in anonymous postings from student accounts, there's a lot of voice data that suggests these things are happening. They may not be as outrageous or as flamboyant as some of these examples, but they are still happening. So at this point, we're going to kind of get into the nitty gritty of the presentation. I'm going to go through a couple of considerations here, and then I'm going to turn the conversation over to Rebecca Hughes. We have shared at Blair a actual kind of policy that has been shared staff-wide that kind of hits on some of these key considerations that you see here. These are adapted, as you can see, from Drake University. These are some of the best practices that we're going to show you some examples of in a minute. But again, some key best practices: making students aware in advance that they're going to encounter some of the language in your classroom, openly engaging in a discussion about the harm that's associated with the gratuitous use of such terms. And again, like I said, that can go for students of all ethnic backgrounds and origins. Being mindful, and this is a particular one for us as educators, even where we may feel like historically there is a pedagogical imperative to not shield students from the reality of how some of this language has been used in the past. The rub is that whatever imperative we think might be served is likely to be undermined by its use in the classroom. And a lot of students, again, understandably are going to feel that it's going to create a very harmful and hostile environment. And when a student feels like they're in an environment like that, they're not going to be able to receive effective instruction anyway. So that's really kind of what we need to weigh as our priorities as educators. Using substitute to that end, using substitute terms, whether it be orally or in writing, are often best practices, and then immediately responding to students when, again, that language is used. And we've already kind of shown you some examples of how that can be done. So at this point, again, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Hughes, and she's going to walk through some of the kind of strategies and techniques that we use when it comes to classwork around some of these considerations. So with that, Ms. Hughes, I'll turn it over to you. You let me know as you need me to advance the slides. And again, if folks have questions, please do feel free to engage in the chat window or speak up.
Thank you. So I tried to break it down similar to how Mr. Culver just went through some best practices. I tried to break it down based on topic. So this is about gauging student readiness. And so I teach social studies. We talk about a lot of topics that are sensitive all the time. And it's just about being mindful. So the quote, students don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. For me, that really kind of encompasses this. You have to know your students. You have to know kind of who they are and what might trigger them. And so these are different ways that I have tried to engage students. So I include processing questions. So I ask students like this graphic that you can see kind of in the middle with the different colors. It's a warm-up card. So it asks students, it lets them know, like today we're going to be talking about Japan's imperialism, and we're going to come into topics of militarized rape, war, death, etc. Where are you? Circle as many as apply. And it can be, I think I'm okay with this, but I don't want to talk about it. Like, I don't want to answer any questions. I don't want to participate. I would like to go to my counselor and loop back with you at another time. So it's just gauging students' readiness and willingness to kind of engage in the content. And it also lets me know if a student says like, I'm okay to learn about it, but I don't want to talk about it. I then know ahead of time, like I'm not going to, not that I would ever put somebody on the spot, but I'm especially mindful around sensitive subjects of where students feel. And I know, like I've had students say, I don't want to be the spokesperson for my entire identity. And so this is another way that they can do that quietly and kind of let me or whoever know this is where I am and this is what I'm ready for. I also, the first few weeks of school, I always do a reflection on every assignment to get a sense of how students learn and how they want information to be presented. So it'll be like, did you enjoy the notes? Did you like having videos? Did you want to hear my voice more? Did you want me to shut up more? Like, how do you want this information? And it's just check boxes. It's really easy. It's like an exit ticket, but it allows me to start to kind of tailor my lessons and my instruction to the needs of the students in front of me. And I think one of the things that Zoom helped with, we often did the how are you feeling today? And we had different graphics and kids put it in the chat box. Those kind of ways to gauge readiness and engagement still work in the classroom. They're still tools that you can use. And there are some days where if everybody is not in a good space, I'm going to pivot a little bit and not tackle the hardest topics because we're not in a space where anybody's really going to be receptive to that. So these are just some different ways to gauge readiness. Can you go to the next slide, Mr. Culver? So then there's also trigger warnings. And like Mr. Culver modeled at the beginning, we're professionals. We know the material that we're teaching. So we know when there are things that will come up in the material that may be triggering. And it's not saying that they will be, but I always try to give warnings or notices or heads up. I'll put them into the PowerPoint. I also verbalize them in the class. So for example, this one in the top left is a screenshot from a PowerPoint. It says this video has an image of lynched bodies at and I tell them exactly when they're going to see that image so that students know this is coming up. They're ready for it. I can then give a verbal prompt like, hey, we've been watching this for a minute, 20 seconds, just letting you know. The same thing, images include language that's offensive and targets Asian American community members. So this is when we're talking about Japanese internment. The students might not feel anything, but there are some who might. And so it's just a heads up, hey, this is coming. Same thing, images show brutality towards Mexican people and references to sexual harassment. And this video has live footage from the interviews conducted in 1940s and 50s that include terminologies and sentiments that could be offensive to members of the LGBTQIA plus community. And so we were watching Stonewall Uprising. There's a lot of live footage of people talking about like how they were tried to be ungayed or whatever. And it's hard. Students have said like it's hard to sit through. And so some of this has been learning where I've presented something and kids have been like, ooh, ouch, like a heads up would have been nice. If we're talking about kids in camps on the border, we have students who've gone through similar things. They don't really want to sit there and hear about it, but they're also not always comfortable to say that. And so just giving them a heads up. And I do that so that students know, like, if you need to take a break, go get water, this is what's coming up. So you're aware ahead of time. Any questions so far?
You're clearing the chat window, Misuse.
Huh?
No questions in the chat window, so you're good.
Okay. Can you go to the next one? So another one is framing language. And again, we're using historical documents. And I know this comes up in English also sometimes, but anytime there's going to be language that's no longer socially acceptable, I'll include a little note at the top of the assignment that just says, there will be language that's not socially acceptable. And I tell students that they can replace some words, and I give them an example in the text of what it looks like to replace it with the brackets. Or if they're quoting directly, they can use it. But if they're analyzing or creating their own words, they have to use socially acceptable language in 2021. And so this is a lot of the documents that we look at, especially when you're talking about, the early 1900s, the word Negro is used to describe Black people. That is an appropriate replacement for Black or African American. I do make the point that the N-word is derogatory and hateful, and it's not a synonym, even though it's used in this country in some cases to be a synonym for Black people. I'm not creating the cognitive association that replacing that word with Black is appropriate. It is a hateful word. It is a derogatory word. It is not a replacement that is used in formalized documents. And so we put that on the assignment so that kids start to know and they understand how language has evolved, but how in 2021, 2022, when we're writing, when we're talking, we're not using antiquated terms in the same way. You go to the next one. And then editing historical documents. So again, like I said, the N-word, we know it's derogatory, it's offensive. This is an example from an excerpt, from Letter to Birmingham Jail. Everybody who looks at this knows what word went there. It doesn't have to be printed for you to know what word went there. And so I personally, and I encourage the members of the department, if it's in a text where you can block it out, do so. Because again, students know what word is there. We do it with other curse words. We block them out. We find ways to bleep them out of written language. So we're not sending papers home with the word FU on them. We do the same thing with this word. And if you're not going to block it out, to make sure that you provide a trigger warning to let students know that they will see this word. It's important not to use the word when you're, like Mr. Culver said, but I do think, there was an instance where a teacher was reading it tried to provide context for why the word would come up, said the word, left the word printed on the paper, and there was a lot of harm that was done, which goes to the next point, if you don't mind clicking, acknowledging harm. So when it happens, right, we're professionals, we try to be thoughtful, we're trying to be inclusive. There's a lot of unlearning that has to happen for a lot of us to get there. However, there's the impact of what we do matters sometimes more than the intent. And it's important that we acknowledge the harm that's caused. It's also something that I think when we're in positions and identities of privilege, we don't have to think about how students, colleagues still have to show up, still have to perform, still have to engage after harm has been done. And so I think it's an important reminder, especially for those of us when we're talking about, race and we're white, to remember that our Black students, our Hispanic students, our Asian students, our Indigenous students are going to still show up and engage and perform regardless of what we do, because they have to, right? They don't have a choice to kind of opt out of it. And so the example I talked about where the teacher said the word and left it printed, their response was, well, the students continue to participate. They didn't stop participating. And that's something that I don't think, we don't have to think about it, right? Like, oh, my bad, I said sorry, or I didn't even know that harm was done because they didn't stop participating. The child who had an issue with it is a Black child. They didn't have a choice. They had to continue to kind of work through the harm independently and individually. And so it's just about being thoughtful. Like, we're learning, we're unlearning, we make mistakes. It's really owning them. Like I said, there have been some times I've shown something or talked about something and I've asked students afterwards, and some of them are like, yeah, that, like, it kind of stung a little. And I'm like, thanks for letting me know, because it's not something that I think about in my everyday life. It's not something that some parts of my identity have to deal with. And so I think it's important that you do acknowledge the harm, and that's how we build kind of climates where students do feel safe.
No, thank you so much, Ms. Hughes. Again, we are at our 3:15 here. So I would like to acknowledge that. So folks are in a place where they need to get to another session, then we want to kind of create a natural stopping point here. This is a copy of the, that you see on the screen here, the policy that we've enacted at Blair. I've put the participant survey link in the chat window for folks who need to do that before they leave. For folks who do have some additional time, if you'd like, we're happy to kind of stay here and chat with folks who are interested. I saw a comment from Ms. Adamson and from Dave, this about kind of experiences in the classroom that they've had. If we'd like to talk through those, we're happy to do so. And it's, with Ms. Adamson's point there, a lot of classes teach Zora Hurston's work, obviously, and having a rich discussion on Negro as opposed to the more derogatory N-word that most of us more commonly recognize is, I think, a relevant conversation to have. And as was said, when it comes to Dave's comment about use of the word Indian, I think that is a very also appropriate conversation to have with students because there have been a lot of dialogue within Indigenous communities, and it's not monolith as to how folks feel about that term. So having an open discussion using some of the practices that we reviewed here today, I think is all appropriate. So again, I'll stop there. Ms. Hughes, if you had any last comments you wanted to offer, again, I cede the floor to you. For folks who still would like to use this slideshow for your own reference, there are links to some sample assignments that also give some additional context for some of the things that Ms. Hughes was talking about. I've put that in the chat window again. And again, if you'd like to stick around, we'll be here for a few more minutes. But thank you for your time today, and we're happy to be in touch after for any questions that might arise. Again, it's been a pleasure to connect with everyone.
Thank you. We'll see you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. This was very useful. Thank you.
Thanks. It's good to see you. Hey, Rock.
What's up? Good to see you.
All right, I'm joining another session. Sorry I was late. I had a little trouble joining, but we'll talk soon.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Mr. Culver, so
Yes.
I think we're still on. I'm still on. Hi.
So you're
So,
on.
I met you, just, sorry, there.